I've talked a lot on this channel about how people's attention spans are shrinking because of, our content. The cycles in which we receive our dopamine hits now from content is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking.
Yeah,
And I think
I disagree with that entirely.
okay,
I
please,
don't think there's
that's
any good
please,
evidence to say that that's true. If you're a surgeon and you're doing a complicated 8-hour operation, what's the evidence that your ability to task focus and pay attention has shrunk? Um, I think what we're mixing up here is uh, uh, attention and distraction. They're two different things,
okay.
and we can put ourselves in a situation where we are distracted continually, in which case then our attention to a task is necessarily going to be shorter. But if you put yourself in a situation where you don't have access to your emails, you don't have your notifications on, you don't have all of that stuff, and you just focus, you'll be able to do it. There's no evidence at all to say that your car mechanic who's trying to fix your car engine or your bicycle mechanic is only able to work for an hour now, compared to 20 years ago when they could work for 8 hours and focus on the problem. I think really what we have done is created an environment of distractibility. And I think that environment of distractibility happens most for people who live very online lives. And you don't have to. I don't have a Twitter account.
Yeah.
I deliberately, for all sorts of reasons. I don't use Facebook for any particular major purpose. You can create these spaces for yourself, and if you're focused on a bigger task, well, then you just keep away from this other stuff. And if you find your task, here's a little tip: if you find your task or your attention is wandering off the task, often you'll wander to check your emails. Just bleed that little bit of attention away into something like this, little
Yeah.
sleazy ball.
Yeah,
And you'll
I have the exact same.
Yeah,
The,
and you'll find that your natural focus away from the task is going to come back to you. And again, think about yourself, or think about humans in the conditions that we evolved. If you're out in the savannah, digging vegetables out of the ground or tubers out of the ground, you're going to have to look around every so often to make sure that there isn't a big thing sneaking up behind you which wants to eat you. So this kind of infovore idea, I think that there's an evolutionary value to not being entirely task focused all the time.
yeah.
If you're task focused and you're crossing the road, you're going to get flattened. So you do need to think about what you mean by paying attention to things. So, to my mind, I'm not that worried about it.
Interesting. Even in future, because what I'm thinking, I completely agree that there are mechanisms that people can put in place so that they don't, have the negative effects of what the content media, I believe, is doing. But for younger generations who have grown up on TikTok and have grown up on 10-second pieces of content versus 90-minute movies, are you not pessimistic that that's going to have an effect on even their
No.
expectation on how they receive pleasure and the expectation that they receive enjoyment? I'm very interested in that.
I have a 16-year-old who looks at TikTok. So, am I worried about her in terms of her media consumption? Nah. Look, people at one time thought that allowing people to be taught how to read and write would distract them from their work in the fields. People objected to the recording of music, so that people weren't going to concert halls and they were instead listening to music at home. People objected to radios coming into our homes, televisions coming into our homes, all of these kinds of things. I haven't seen, the kind of media hysteria aside, I've seen no good causal evidence that these are having terrible effects on people. And in fact, the extent that there's causal evidence, first of all, blaming use of a mobile phone for X, you need to be really careful about that. People who are socially isolated in school, for example, but who have an online life, find actually that benefits their well-being. There are places where the mobile phone shouldn't be in a classroom. We know when you ban it from classrooms that performance goes up, people adapt to that. Humans are hugely adaptable. We learn from our mistakes. We don't allow people to go drunk driving anymore. Whereas 100 years ago, what were the regulations on drinking and driving? People just drank and then they drove and then they killed themselves.
Yeah.
And then we adapted to it. So I I think when you step back from these things, we're actually pretty good at evolving mechanisms to deal with whatever the new uh, shiny thing is.
I hope it's true. I think I'm a little bit more pessimistic than you, just in terms of it. I think I would agree that maybe there isn't the most concrete hard data at the moment, but it seems so logical to me that if people are in training their even reward systems on really short feedback loops, that they are going to struggle
Yeah,
to
what's
read.
the evidence that they are doing that?
Well, I would say that the evidence, for one, engagement increases on a video as you decrease the video size, and they've shown that on lots of platforms like TikTok, basically the optimal video length is basically no longer than 30 seconds. The retention on these videos is incredibly low if it goes above a particular time length, and it just seems to me that if you're sitting there and you're scrolling and you've instead of sitting there and paying attention to one idea or story for 90 minutes, and you've seen hundreds that are 10 seconds long, that is going to have effects on your dopamine system and how you receive
Yeah, so
reward and pleasure.
I find the invocation of the word dopamine a bit disturbing. You see these phrases about dopamine culture, dopamine hits, dopamine this, that, and the other, and it really hacks me off. I must be honest.
Please.
If it were true, we would all be out there abusing L-Dopa, and we're not. It's cheap as chips, and it's available, and we would all be in this lovely haze of dopamine, and that's not really the case. Kids, and I know this from my own daughter, are perfectly capable of putting their phone in the little bag, sticking it in their locker, and paying attention in school for 40 minutes at a time. We've seen in the last couple of years these absolutely epic movies. The Irishman is 4 hours long. The Dune sequence, each movie is 3 hours. The Killers of the Flower Moon was 3.5 hours. And people are capable of sitting there and absorbing things like this. We know book sales have gone up dramatically over the past years. There's no evidence that people are reading less. There might be some evidence that people are reading less in a particular age group, which is the 8 to 14-year-old age group. But how strong that evidence is, I don't know. But we do know that book sales are not tanking. And we know alternative means of consuming books have become really popular. Audiobooks are a big thing now. So people are getting books and they're consuming them on the way in on the train, or when they're out for a walk, or whatever it happens to be. I'm much less worried about this. There's a kind of a moral panic about something to do with the kids every decade or so.
I really hope you enjoyed that clip with cognitive neuroscientist Dr. Shane O'Mara. If you did, I couldn't recommend more our full conversation. It was really wide ranging. We talked about walking, creativity, the use of devices, if our attention spans are shrinking, TikTok, loads. It was a really interesting conversation. I couldn't recommend it more. And as always, subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time.